Welcome to GreenBiz Studio. I'm John Davies, Senior Vice President at GreenBiz, and I'm excited to be speaking with Tobias Parker, Director at Anthesis. Welcome, Tobias.
Thank you, John. It's great to be here.
So, Tobias, what has the impact of the SBTi's net zero standard had upon the market in terms of helping to clarify what it means for businesses?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. So I think it has been really positive and also long overdue, because in reality, everyone's wanted to be net zero. Everyone's wanted to say they're going to be net zero for some time. And that has created a huge issue, really, in terms of understanding as to what net zero really means for a business, right? And so to give you an example, we do a lot of work with the Science Based Target Initiative, so we've seen this coming. But many other organizations have been reaching for definitions of net zero that have not necessarily been that robust. And what that's led to is some sort of difficult dynamics, really. So it's a critical period right now. To talk about that in a bit more detail. So I went to COP26 in Glasgow. And it was really interesting to hear how the term net zero had been picked up by the activists outside, a lot of the youth movement in particular, that were talking about net zero being complete greenwash, right? And so that to me felt quite sad, actually, quite saddening, that we could see that Science Based Target Initiative, which had just actually announced what this standard does and is and means for a business, had just announced it. And yet outside at the same moment, the youth movement were saying, look, this is just greenwash. And actually, when you look at the Science Based Target Initiative version of net zero, it's not complete because this is an evolving space, right? Dynamic evolving space, but it is as rigorous as you could probably get. And they're really setting the standard very high here. So they're talking about absolute reductions to 90% by 2040, maybe slightly later, right? So that feels really robust and would actually require transformation. Many organizations would have to, in some case, totally or fundamentally change their business models in order to achieve that. Others would have to undergo significant change and transformation as well. So it does mean complete transformation, really, of our economy as it currently is. And so if that definition of net zero is the one that becomes the dominantly understood and accepted definition of net zero, and organizations can achieve it, then we're onto something. But what we also see is that because of the lead time to building up to the point where net zero from SBTi came about, there've been a lot of claims made out there, and it was still, unfortunately, whilst it's created clarity in some respects, there's almost a battle for space here. It's a bit like battle for standards, right? And so, to give you an example, and much of this stuff is well intentioned, but B Corp is a really good movement. Right, there's no two ways about it. We see the businesses coming in. We are a B Corp member. It's a tough standard to hit. Now, the way they talk about net zero, so when you become a B Corp member, you have to pledge, in effect, to become net zero as per B Corp's definition. It's not as tough as SBTi's definition. And so whilst the intention is good in terms of moving organizations forward, there is a question as to how we communicate that to organizations. Say, yeah, okay, so there's a net zero standard here and there's a net zero standard here. Now, this one doesn't really, according to science, drive the level of change that's going to be required. This one does. And the risk is that organizations understand the size of the transformation that's required and just want to make their lives a little bit easier. And I guess what that means, and to the point that a lot of my colleagues make when they're talking with clients, is actually no one business can be net zero, right? Either we're all net zero or we're not. And one business saying, yay, we're net zero, doesn't cut the mustard, because fundamentally the economy is not net zero. So I think it's I think we've got to try and shift emphasis onto SBTi's net zero. I'll just I'll finish that comment with just one sort of example. So it's recently released Corporate Climate Responsibility Monitor by Carbon Market Watch and New Climate Institute. They looked at 25 large businesses who have pledged to be net zero, which equates to 2.7 gigatons of emissions reduction. When they did their analysis on it, what that pledge really meant was only 0.5 gigatons were actually being, committed to being reduced. So you can see the difference between pledging to be net zero and what organisations are actually planning. So overall, it's been good, but we've still got a long way to go.
Well, let's drill down a little bit into that, how we're going to get there. What activities are you seeing most often that companies are undertaking to move towards their targets?
Yeah, so that's a really good question as well. And, actually, it's not easy, but we are seeing more and more businesses are measuring their footprints and setting science-based targets, whether they are actually verified by a Science-Based Target Institute or not. They're using the methodology, so that's happening. But what often, where we get to with many organizations is you look at your scopes 1 and 2 emissions, so your gas, your electricity, your transportation, and you can start to figure out some plans around that, renewable energy certificates or virtual power purchase agreements, fuel switching, et cetera. But scope 3 is the real tough one to crack. So many organizations take a look at this and they get kind of put off by what they need to do with scope 3. And the solutions are not straightforward, but what it does do by engaging with scope 3, so your supply chain, upstream, downstream value chain emissions, is if you take a long-term view, it allows us to bring an innovation perspective on it. And what it means is, in effect, re-engineering, reorienting our entire value chains. So that brings into play things like circular economy, business transformation, et cetera, et cetera. So we see more and more businesses moving towards the realization that actually to hit this target, we're going to have to reimagine things, which is hugely exciting. Another couple of things, maybe at a slightly higher level, we're seeing things join up, right? So organizations doing ESG over here, they're doing net zero over here. This stuff is coming together. And what's bringing it together is partly a sense of climate risk. So you've got ESG, climate risk coming into inventory, coming into science-based targets, coming into net zero road mapping, coming into action plans and strategies. And so we are seeing more businesses going on that full journey and joining these things up. So that's not a single activity, a series of activities, but it's on a connectivity between these different threads. And I think probably more tactically, two things I'd flag out of the many. One is that organizations are realizing the ones who are going to make the break, make the change, are the ones who are going, this is a governance, this is a change program that we need here, right? We've got to get governance in on the long term to help this organization make the transformation. That needs to be top level governance. So really getting the C-suite involved in this stuff, seeing it as a strategic risk and opportunity. And then I'll just sort of flag this because it's a bit of an old one, but we're seeing it come back in favor. And this is internal carbon pricing, right? Really interesting sort of little technique. A lot of companies went down the route of getting internal carbon price some years ago because it got them a higher CDP score or whatever, but it never got used. Now, because of this climate risk view, it's a tool that the finance guys are going, okay, we can actually start to internalize some of this into our financial and strategic decision making. So we're seeing a real resurgence of interest in internal carbon pricing, but not as a sort of tick box exercise, as a strategic and financial management tool to use. So, there's definitely an evolution of maturity happening there, which is encouraging.
Great. So just one last thing to sort of wrap up. We've read recently, you've merged Climate Neutral Group with Anthesis. So how has the Science-Based Targets Initiative net zero methodology standard impacted the market for offsets?
Yeah. Okay, so again, another good one, and this comes to a slightly sort of controversial topic, some may say, and goes back to our conversation earlier about COP and the role of offsets. Science-Based Target Initiative, the gold standard of these sort of climate frameworks, have been consistent in saying, look, you cannot use offsets as they're currently defined to help you meet your targets. So we agree with that. However, what they've recognized, so again, this comes back to no one business can be net zero. We can only all be net zero together. Science-Based Target Initiative has recognized the benefits and the value, the systems-wide value of carbon projects, carbon reduction, carbon avoidance, and indeed carbon removals projects outside the value chain, because some people just can't afford to do it. So that financial transfer into projects that across the system lead to greenhouse gas reductions is a good thing, and so they've acknowledged that within the net zero standard. And so there's a lot of nervousness in the communities about what was going to come out, and rightly so. There's also measures in place to improve the standards. But our clients are looking for this stuff, right? They want to be investing beyond value chains, and so we're really pleased to bring in the Climate Neutral Group, who have deep subject matter expertise in this place, and they've created various quite innovative certification processes for products. And that then brings us back to the sense of thinking about full value chains, thinking about green design, thinking about the materials that go in, thinking about how products are put together. So for us, I think the market has really grown significantly post COP and with the launch of the standard, because there's an acceptance there are some good things that go with offsets, but they have to be done properly. And so we definitely welcome initiatives such as the Task Force for Scaling Voluntary Carbon Markets and the like. So overall, it's been good.
Great. Well, I know there's a lot more we could unpack here, but our time is getting close to done. So I've been speaking with Tobias Parker, Director at Anthesis. Thanks, Tobias.
Thank you very much, John. Good to talk with you.